So our theme verse comes from 1 Timothy 1:15. The saying is trustworthy, deserving of full acceptance, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the foremost. And I think that what I've highlighted there is probably the saying that was already in effect when Paul wrote the letter. And we've kind of put a condensed version of it as a reminder for us that, this year we're thinking about that the reason that we are Christians is because we are sinners. We don't become Christians if we're perfect, if we're holier than other people. We become Christians because we were sinners. And some of us are the foremost sinners that we might have ever run across. That was true for Paul in his day. It might be true for some of us in our day. And our thought process as we go through this year is, how can we help other sinners who do not really yet know Christ receive that forgiveness, that grace that He has given us through His own flesh and through His own life. So this lesson, it's a little bit of an extension of last week's when I talked about, is the church a family or a business? And we could actually go through a lot of passages in the Bible and talk about how we're brothers and sisters and God is our Father and all of these family words, and there's lots and lots of them. There are some co-worker, in fact, there are some phrases that we are fellow workers. There are some phrases that we are all part of a working group. And so those are there. And I talked last week a lot about how some people are more comfortable in certain environments than others. Some people like the rules a workplace gives them because it prevents people's emotions from kind of getting carried away. It prevents people's personal feelings or thoughts from spilling out onto everybody around them, which we know in families happens all the time, doesn't it? Because we're around each other, and sometimes around each other when we're our most tired, our most stressed. We might have been stressed all day at work. We come home to some other just piles of bills and other problems, and all of a sudden we're not as nice at home as we were to our coworkers. And so that kind of model makes some people like, it's kind of nice to be at work. I don't have to stress about, Dan's walked in and he's stressed out about something happened in his life. I don't really have to worry about it. I can just put my head down in my cubicle and kind of go to work and do my thing. And then when I'm done, I can kind of get out of here. I don't have to bring on everybody else's problems. I don't become my coworker's keeper. Problem is, we are our brother's keeper, though, aren't we? And so it makes the family dynamic a little more challenging. In fact, I was thinking about this. I was going to ask the question, who would choose if you had to do it, you could just choose from anybody in the whole world, anybody you've ever seen, known, or heard of, which parents would you choose, which grandparents, which kids, but everybody would kind of say their own. I'm not sure everybody would be completely honest. Maybe not in every time in their life anyway. There are probably moments in our life we have felt otherwise. But I want you to think about where we've all been born into families of all kinds of different sorts, different habits, different abilities, different talents, different wealth, all kinds of differences, and none of us had a choice about our families. We were just born, we got what we got. And if we think about it, and we look at a lot of our siblings, now, for those of us who've come from larger pool of siblings, it's probably easier to go sometimes see that there's a lot of differences between us. We're not each other's best friends. Very few of my siblings are each other's best friends. Now, there's a lot of distance between a number of us. There's a lot of time spans. It makes us not, super compatible. But there's also a lot of just choice difference. We choose to dress differently. We choose to do different things. We like different stuff. And we came from the same parentage. And sometimes, though, when we get to choose our groups that we get together with, whether it's on social media or in churches, sometimes we just want to choose people like us. We just want to choose people who kind of have the same thoughts. We want to choose kind of people who we get along with. But the truth is, when we were born into God's family, we didn't choose that family either. Sometimes some of us might even be really close to people who aren't Christians and go, I'm kind of better friends with people who aren't Christians than I am with some Christians. Well, it kind of happened in your own family too, didn't it? Usually for different reasons, because maybe you had some things in common, things you guys like to do, and your other brothers and sisters didn't like it. All kinds of reasons for those things. But in the end, your family is your family, isn't it? And God has said you need to honor your family. And you need to help your family. You need to care for your family, even though you didn't choose it. And I think the same holds true for the church. I don't know that if we had a bunch of different churches where every single one was everybody was exactly the same, kind of like, some of our social media groups we're a part of, right? It's like, bowlers who like to bowl on Thursday mornings. That's my group. It's like, that wouldn't be you wouldn't get a very big cross-section of thoughts and opinions, would you? We'd kind of all have probably similar traits. We'd probably have similar habits, probably have similar schedules. But that's what happens when we choose these groups and choose to isolate ourselves amongst people who all kind of think the same as we do. And there's a term used for it in business and politics and other things. It's called a groupthink. Sometimes we get into our own, we all think exactly the same way, and we just all keep talking to each other and keep reinforcing to each other how wonderful we all are. And people who come in who have a different perspective and view just are not that welcome. And so, is that healthy for us? I probably would suggest not. If God designed the family to be the way we've got it, with lots of different personality types, lots of different attitudes, a lot of different dynamics going on with the family, because what does families do to us? Challenge us, don't they? It's a challenge to keep loving a spouse for decades. It's not that you don't love them and like them and desire them. No matter how much you love them, no matter how much you desire them, it's still a challenge to love them for decades. And we figure that out. And we figure out how to overcome that if we're able to. Unfortunately, not everybody makes it. And our siblings, when we're younger, sometimes we wanted to kill each other. We didn't have any weapons to do that, though. So parents were kind of there stopping us. Maybe we got to be better friends when we were older. Maybe not. But they challenged us, didn't they? And sometimes where you were born in the family determined kind of your place in the family for a long time. You're the oldest. Boy, now, hopefully you're one of those oldest that really enjoyed bossing everybody else around. But sometimes you're the oldest, you got to get told, you've got this responsibility. You didn't want it. You didn't have those other kids. But you don't get a choice. You got to take care of them. And you're responsible for them. And then you're the baby. And you can't ever do anything everybody else does. Everybody else always gets to do everything you don't get to do. We all have all of these differences. And the truth is, the church family is exactly the same way. We sometimes try to boil it down and to where we're all, the same, but we're just not. But that, I think, is a good thing. I think that those differences amongst each other help us to grow and help us to grow more patient. Because when we all think and say exactly the same thing, we all kind of have, yeah, let's do this. And then somebody else comes in and says, well, wait a second, I don't know about that. And you're like, oh, you're just slowing us down. We have to learn to be patient. And so I want to think about that, take that concept of the church and the family and the connection we have with one another. And I want to kind of draw it in here to John 15, where Jesus talks about him being the vine. Some translations actually say he's the true vine, the authentic vine. Actually, verse 1 talks about that. And he says, I'm the true vine. Now, and why would he say that? Why I'm the authentic vine? Because if you were an Israelite listening to Jesus talk, you would know a lot of metaphors or similes, I can never remember which one's which, for the Old Testament prophets talking about Israel being God's vine. That he was the vine dresser, they were the vineyard, and they were all connected to one another, and God was taking care of that vineyard. And a lot of times that vineyard, God at times kind of, dug it up and burned it. I'm helping them, and I keep doing all this stuff for them, and they produce no grapes at all. And you think about that. Would you keep putting your effort and all kinds of effort into growing and planting stuff, and it never, ever produces what you want? At what point, how long do you go before you go, okay, I'm about ready to dig this thing up and throw it out? Turn it into compost. Well, my dad got to that point at one point with an avocado tree in our yard. I think it was 7 years, and it produced one. The 7th year, it produced a single avocado, and it was inedible. He was ready to cut the thing down. He loved avocados. Always, 2 houses I grew up in had avocado trees, both of them. And he was ready. Now, he didn't cut it right down, and I think a year or two later, it actually began to produce really good avocados. But it took a long time. Now, other kinds of plants, you don't wait 7 years. If they're not producing in the spring or the fall, you're like, rip it out. What are we, though? What do we produce in our life? Because what he's going to tell us is he's the vine. Jesus is the vine that connects every one of God's people together. We didn't choose the vine. Now, we do get to choose whether we're part of the vine or not. We can say, God, I don't really want anything to do with you. God has given us that choice and given us the will to say and to walk away. But there's consequences to that. But he says, but to those who will become a part of Christ, to abide in him as he talks about here, that person can bear a lot of fruit. And he says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, our human minds look at ourselves and our lives in this world, and sometimes we think, without God, I went and did all this stuff, and I did that stuff, and I had fun, and I laughed, and I was, But what God is telling us is, when we go off without him, we might do a lot of things. Some of them might even please us, might make us really happy, but none of them are really going to bear fruit that's good. And so he says, being part of Jesus, being connected to the vine, he says, we will bear much fruit. What is the fruit? I'm not going to go into the fruit today, but we could think about it. Some people, I think, take this passage and talk about the fruit being other Christians. Actually, in the analogy, that's not accurate. Because other Christians in the analogy here are branches. And so the branches on the vine are not bearing, the branches aren't bearing branches. The branches are bearing, in his analogy, they're bearing fruit. If we're the branches bearing fruit, the fruit is really godliness. Love, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. And if we didn't have one another, would we be able to produce that fruit as well, do you think? If we didn't have the vine, the part of the vineyard that we're connected to and see on a regular basis, I think we wouldn't be able to bear fruit the way we would like. I think that's one of the things that God is trying to show us here, and Jesus was talking about. Verses in this section, it's already been read for us, all 11 verses there of Jesus talking about himself being the true vine. In verses 5 through 8, he said, I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers. That's what the vine dresser does when he comes down through the vineyard, doesn't he? He looks through it and he goes, oh, there's like a withered branch. It's not growing at all. Snip that thing off. I want it to affect all those other branches around it. And he says, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. Now, I've talked about this passage a lot in the years that I have preached, but I have never once actually taken the time to look at something I looked at yesterday. And that was, I looked at the case of the word you in the whole passage. There's not a single case of the you being singular. The you and throughout the whole thing is you. When he singularizes, and there's a few singular things, whoever abides in me, I in him, he it is that bears, for apart from me, you can. So he says individuals can bear fruit, individuals can do things, but you abide in him. You abide in him. Not you abide in him and you abide in him. It's you abide in him. It is a collective thing that he has put, that he says here, that he's, even notice in the last verse I used here, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. You is my disciples. So you can't be a you singular on the vine. If you're on the vine, you're part of you. You might want to sit there and growing off the vine and go, I'd really like not to talk to those other branches. Those other branches irritate me. They bother me. But the truth is, you're still one of the branches. You can't change that. I can't change that. We can ignore it. We can try to pretend I'm different from those other branches. I'm better. I'm smarter. I know the truth more. I'm more loving. I'm more compassionate. I'm more forget. We come up with all kinds of ways, right, that we're better than other people. When we compare ourselves to other people, we can almost always say a comparison of two people, you would almost always have some strengths of one person that they're better at than the other, and some strengths the other one has that are better at that than the other person. But what we always tend to do when we compare ourselves with anybody else is, well, the things we're good at are the things that are most important. That's what tends to happen in our thinking. But we are in him as a collective. We're not in him singularly. We're not isolated little rocks. We are, if we think about ourselves being like he called Peter the rock, a stone that could be thrown. But Jesus is the cliff. He's the rock that's immovable. Well, the stones all are a part of that big rock. We all all little rocks come out of one bigger rock. We're all part of him. So we are in this with him and with one another, like it or not. Just like our own families. And so Like I mentioned last week, and I was talking with somebody a few days ago, in fact, talking about this concept of families and why a lot of people are maybe more comfortable with coworkers and their friends, because their families, they may not actually get along with their families well. Their families might not like some of the things they're doing. They may not agree with some of the things they're doing. We lose relationships sometimes with our families because of the things we do or the things they do. But, our friends we get to hang out with, well, they don't judge me. We're all we get to be connected. And so sometimes when our families weren't good, we don't like the concept of family. We like the idea of being a coworker a lot more than being family. But you see, God isn't asking us to be a family like all of those dysfunctional families in the world. He's asking us to strive to be a family like God wants a family to act. Not the way humans sometimes act in families. And so, but in order to do that with a whole group of people who are sinners, we have to grow. We have to overcome our normal selves in order to actually function the way God would want us to. We have to get beyond me. The selfish, self-centered part of us has to die away so that we see ourselves as a we. It's, when people talk to couples who are going to get married, and in the past when I've sat and talked with people getting married and counseled at times, and when you hear older couples, sometimes you hear them say we a lot. And they're like, well, we'll have to kind of, so you go up to one person of a couple, the other spouse isn't even there, and they go, I'd really like you to come and do something. They go, well, we'll have to kind of see if that fits. Why do they do that? Because they're so used to thinking of their spouse and them as a unit that and then sometimes you even have to say, no, I wasn't actually inviting your spouse, just inviting you. Now, some couples don't grow to that kind of connectedness. They stay real separate. Struggle maybe a little bit more. Not that a couple that grows tight isn't going to have struggles too, but it's just like we think of we. See, I can't make a decision. I can't choose to do something or not do something or make plans without understanding what Julie's plans and schedule and things are like, because anything I do affects her. But that's what happens in a family. And the truth is that's what happens in churches too. And I think a lot of people think they might just come and listen, and they don't teach, they don't do other things a lot, and they don't think they're important. But actually, you think about that. Do we really think that the members of a family that do the least are the least important? I just want to think of a family. Okay? We got a family, a few families sitting over here, a lot of kids. I'm going to guess in the Hastings family that probably the people they worry about the most do the least in the house. And in fact, probably do a lot of stuff that requires the other two to do a lot of work. But we don't consider them unimportant, do we? Because that's the nature of a family. We can't be a family if any one of us isn't important. That's not the nature of family. Now, in a coworker, that's why I think a lot of times as churches, we actually function more like we're coworkers. Like, hey, I'm here to do my thing, you do your thing, and we'll kind of leave each other alone. Maybe we're like siblings who don't get along real well. But we're like coworkers, and if you're not here, it's like, oh boy, good thing I don't have that coworker here today bugging me. That's not family. That doesn't mean families don't bug us sometimes too. But even a family member who bugs us, if something bad happens to them, what do you feel towards that family member? You hurt. You could even be angry with your brother or sister over something they did to you. And you still hurt when something happens to them because they're your family member. And so what I'm really trying to help us see in the last couple of weeks is we have to see ourselves as that important in God's family, in this family, this local family of Christians, because it affects how we interact with each other. It affects maybe even how often or the value we place on interacting. We need to see each other that way. Got to care for one another. You go back a couple of chapters. In fact, I want you to place yourself in this place for just a moment. Imagine yourself, actually, you've already been sentenced. You're kind of out here visiting some people, and you're going to be sentenced. You're going to die tomorrow at noon. So you're going to be executed tomorrow at noon. How are you feeling today? How are you feeling tonight? From chapter 13 all the way till about chapter 19 of John, it occurs that night before Jesus is crucified, and he knows he's going to be crucified. He's been telling them that. Even that night, he tells, he even goes and tells Judas to go turn me in. You should go do that now, because the time is here. He knows he's going to be arrested that night. When he goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane, he knows he's just waiting there to be arrested. He knows what's coming. And we see in the garden how much it's bothering him. But earlier that night, he got down, he actually took towel and took a bowl and took water and had all these guys, all at least, Judas was still there, right, at the washing of the feet. So at least 14 guys. Say, why 14? See, we always put the 12 there. Who do we always forget? They're always there. The two guys that are mentioned in Acts 1. There were only two guys that were there with the apostles all the time. There were only two other men who actually had been there all the time and saw all the stuff that the rest of the apostles had. And so two other guys that have been sitting there with him, and so 14 guys sitting there, and he goes along and he starts washing their feet. Now these guys travel and walk around in dirt and with open shoes. Feet, sweat, dirt. It's not pretty. And that's one of the reasons it was a general habit in most households. They would have water and towels. If you weren't even wealthy, you'd have water and towels for people to wash their feet when they came in from outside. If you were wealthier, you would have one of your servants do that for everybody who visited your household. Jesus this day, that night, got down with a bowl and washed all of their feet. And Peter's like, I'm sure a bunch of them were thinking, this doesn't feel right. I'll bet most of them were thinking, this doesn't feel right. Because they're used to a slave doing it, a servant doing it. Jesus is getting down. Our master is washing all of our feet. Now, he told them when he did it, you don't really understand what I'm doing. Because it wasn't just about washing feet. He was going to leave for them an example indelibly burned into their memories. If your master could get down on his hands and knees and wash your stinky feet, what excuse will you ever have for not helping another person? And so he said, when he had washed their feet, put on his outer garments, and resumed his place, he said, do you understand what I have done to you? Now, can you imagine? I'm sure that's one of those rhetorical questions. It's kind of like, I'm sure they sat there quiet like they did a lot of times when they asked questions, just like kids do to their parents. Parents say, why did you do that? And as a child, You learn early on, if you're stupid enough to try and answer that you're like, okay, I probably shouldn't answer. There is no good answer to that. I just did something horrible. Did something stupid. They asked me why I did it. Do I really want to say, I was just wondering what his hair would do if I lit it on fire? Didn't really want to hear that. So you sit there, don't say anything. You don't really know why you did something stupid. So he's sitting there, and do you understand what I've done to you? I imagine they're thinking, well, you just washed my feet. But that's probably not the right answer. And so he says, you call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. Now, I just wanted to think about this point for a second. When do you wash somebody's feet in their culture? Did you wash them when they're out walking on this, outside and walking around? That's not when you wash them. You wash them when their feet were perfectly clean, walking around inside the house? No, that's not when you wash them. You wash them when they're dirty and coming in from outside. There's a time and a place to wash feet. But what is his point? That we ought to wash a bunch of feet? No, that we ought to take care of needs of other people when they're there. And if we are able. Even if we're the master. Even if we're a boss. Even if we're, so-called have authority of some sort in a human sense. We ought to think of ourselves because, and we see this in the world, right? There are people who rise up in positions of authority in companies, and they look at certain jobs in the company as they're beneath them, aren't they? They're too low for them. Now, do we really appreciate that attitude in bosses? Or do we actually love the boss who feels like they could actually, in a pinch, jump down and do any little thing necessary? Because that's what Jesus was teaching these guys. I need you to teach the church to care for each other. And it doesn't matter about your position. Because if I couldn't do it, anybody can do it. In fact, anybody ought to. There really is no excuse for us. But I want you to think about this, and this is the word I want to look at to the end of this lesson, that we need to practice this caring purposefully. Our families don't get and develop the habits of caring for one another accidentally. Right? Because if we left children to themselves, if the parents just kind of said, hey, you 3 or 4 kids just kind of work it out yourself, they'd mostly hate each other. If we weren't there to kind of referee and stop at times, and somebody'd hurt somebody, and then, because they're not equipped to actually resolve problems, are they? They don't have the wisdom to resolve all the issues that can come up between siblings. And parents need to be purposeful in the lessons we teach and the things we require. And I need you to do that regularly. I need you to do that regularly. We choose to do all those things, and we teach all that stuff for many, many years. Why? Because we have a purpose with our children, don't we? Some people, you can see their purpose, might be, school. That might be the most important thing in life and in the world. Others, maybe a family grows up and sports and athletics, and that's just like the most important thing. And lots of families, they maybe have their thing, but all of us are purposeful about work. We're purposeful about, especially if we're running a family, we've got to think about, hey, we've got to make sure we're doing things. We have to make sure we're getting together. We've got to make sure it takes time, do some things that are fun with one another. We need to be purposeful about it. Well, I think one of the problems we have in churches sometimes is that we are sometimes not purposeful about it. That we just kind of think it will just naturally happen and naturally flow. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. In John 13, 16, and 17 it says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them." If you're purposeful about helping your brothers and sisters, and really anybody, you're going to be happier. See, a lot of times we want to be happy. People want to be happy, and then you tell them how to be happy. Oh, that sounds hard. Well, I guess you don't want to be that happy. I just want to be, I don't want to be that happy. I want to be like this happy where I can kind of focus just on me. Is there a happiness where I can just focus on me? Yeah, but it's real temporary. And you find that it's real hollow. And in the end, it's vain. Be purposeful in good deeds, Galatians 6:10. So then, as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially those who are of the household of faith. And I wanted that especially. What does especially mean? I take special care there, right? When I don't really know when an opportunity will come up to help somebody. I really don't know. But I can look around at people I know and go, you know what? There's probably an opportunity to help somebody there. Because that brother or sister just had a difficult day, a difficult week, a difficult thing happen. Especially means that I take special notice. And so I often focus on making sure we do good to everybody, but in this case, I'm really helping us to try to see God is telling us to take special notice of one another. In 1 Thessalonians 5, 12 to 15, he said, "We ask you, brothers, to respect those." Now, when he says brothers, and when I've been using brothers, I am using male and female all together. I'm talking about mankind. We are all brothers. He says, "To respect those who labor among you, who are over you in the Lord, admonish you, to esteem them very highly and love them because of their work. Be at peace among yourselves. And we urge you, brothers, admonish the idle." See, we don't do that to a coworker, right? Do we admonish the idle coworker? Unless we like them, like, hey, you keep doing that, you're going to get fired. But if we don't like them, we're like, it'd be good riddance. Just make my job harder. But a brother or sister, what do? Especially when mom or dad has given all of us a job and little Susie has decided, I'm not going to do anything while you guys do everything. What do the other brothers and sisters think? Do they admonish their idle sibling? Maybe not with the right attitude all the time. But if we really care about one another and we see somebody idle and that's going to get them in trouble, sometimes even from a good place, kids will say to the other kids, you probably shouldn't do that. You're going to get in trouble with mom and dad. To encourage the faint-hearted. You know, faint-hearted is one of those words, like whoever uses the word faint-hearted. It means to be discouraged, by the way. You can kind of tell to encourage. You encourage the discouraged. We need to do that. We need to help those who are weak. Weak does not mean there's something wrong with them in a spiritual sense. That's not what the term, when you talk about somebody weak, it means somebody incapable of something. It means weakness is somebody whose legs don't work so they can't really walk very well. Or maybe they have to use a cane or they have to use crutches. That's a weakness. Weakness is somebody that has an incapacity of some sort. What do we do for people who have incapacities of any sort? We help them. That's what he's urging us to do as brothers and sisters. Be patient with them all, because they're all sinners too, just like you and I. See that no one repays anyone evil for evil, but always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. So just kind of wrapping it up, we make a great effort to understand and grow in the truth. We're purposeful about classes, right? I'm real purposeful about how we teach every part of the Bible on a regular basis. And those are good. We need to take that same kind of purposefulness to treating each other with love and kindness, respect, and tender loving care. We need to be purposeful about it. We need to figure out how to take special notice of other people. It's the reason we make announcements, by the way. It's why we are always saying, is there anybody in need? And all of us, really, when we see somebody in a need or somebody in a situation, or maybe we just haven't even heard from them, haven't seen them in a while, maybe it's just time to reach out. Jesus said, actually this verse comes after a woman, he's in a crowd, and a woman yells out, "Blessed is your mother," basically. And he says, "Blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and keep it." It's kind of odd, you know. His mother was blessed to a great degree, but he kind of didn't. Somebody said, "Oh, your mother is so blessed. What a wonderful woman." And he's like, you know, who's really blessed are those who get to hear God's word and actually do it. That's the real blessing. If you want to be blessed, if you want to be happy, that's kind of what the idea of blessing is. It's probably a little deeper than the word happy, but it means to be essentially be full of joy and happiness and contentment. And you want to be blessed. Figure out how to help other people.